Hi there, I'm the Reverend Danny Crosby, a Unitarian minister serving congregations in Altrincham and in Urmston, in the northwest of England, and I offer this devotion as a balm for the heart, for the mind, for the spirit, and for the soul. And it's titled, They Might Be Giants, Finding the Courage to Overcome. It's been quite a summer of sport, and it's not over yet. We're still in July after all. There's much more summer to come. I have enjoyed it immensely. The hopes, the dreams, the ups and the downs. That for most has ultimately, of course, ended in disappointment. There can be only one winner, can't they, in such things? But there's been some lovely, wonderful, fantastic, kind of gripping underdog stories throughout this summer. And I think most people love an underdog story, don't they? Probably because I would imagine it taps into that dream that's probably inside a lot of us, that one day, by some incredible miracle, we too might become victorious. Maybe one day. We can but dream. Now, before I came to live in the area that I serve as a minister, I knew very little about the towns of Urmston and Altrincham. I had heard of Urmston only because one of the characters from that wonderful comedy by Victoria Wood, Dinner Ladies, lived there, and there was a recurring joke about one road in and one road out, if you remember. Funny. And I only knew of Altrincham, actually, really. Now, apologies to the people of Altrincham, because I'm sure that wouldn't be different today. It's much better known, isn't it? But Altrincham, when I was growing up, I used to see on the football results every year in the FA Cup. There always seemed to be a giant killing, or there being like a run as a non-league side doing well in the FA Cup. So Altrincham had this kind of mythos about them. I've learnt much more about both places ever since, and it's been a great honour to have served the two communities these last 16 years. Well, it will be 16 years on the 1st of August, Yorkshire Day, of course, which I always like to remind them of. Now, this year's FA Cup brought a local giant killing to mind, actually, perhaps the greatest. Not one that the football supporters of Altrincham would be too pleased about, as it's their rival team, actually. Of course, it was non-league Macclesfield Town. They slayed the Premier League side, Crystal Palace. In fact, they weren't just a Premier League side. Crystal Palace were actually the FA Cup defending champions, having won it in 2025. How the mighty fall. And there's been other examples of minnows defeating or showing real courage and fight against the giants, like Cape Verde in the World Cup, who drew 0-0 with the eventual champions, Spain. Cape Verde, in fact, did not lose a game in their group and were only beaten by the eventual finalists who lost to Spain. They were only beaten by Argentina in extra time, and Argentina actually had scored an equaliser in injury time of normal time, so they were within minutes of beating them. Almost giant killing, eh? But, as is often the case in the World Cup, despite these hiccups, one or two along the way, the Giants did eventually gain victory. The top 4 ranked teams in world football filled the 4 semi-final places. So the Giants prevailed in the end, it would seem. And there's been 2 wonderful examples of minnows defeating giants in this summer's major tennis competitions. Apologies for my bad pronunciation here, but Maja Chawalinska, ranked 114 in the world and a wild card, reached the French Open women's final. And then, of course, there was the British qualifier, Arthur Ferry, another wild card, and another player, coincidentally, also ranked 114 in the world, who reached the semi-final at Wimbledon before finally succumbing to the giant Alexander Zverev. I remember watching them walk out side by side and thinking this truly looks like a David and Goliath rematch, as Zverev stands 6 feet 6 inches. Arthur Ferry was just 5 feet 9, so his head was kind of up to the Zverev's chest, or almost a foot shorter than my head, certainly a head shorter. And instead of the shaft having the shaft the size of a weaver's beam for a spear, Zverev's weapon of choice was, of course, his tennis racket. Looked tiny in his hands. So in such encounters, the Goliaths usually win, but not always. And maybe more often than we might think. Sometimes the underdog does prevail, does win. The small does overcome the giant. Courage can always be found if we carry it within our hearts. The 19th century great Unitarian minister Theodore Parker said, "The arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Bending of the arc. He believed that there was some deep and powerful force in the universe that stands behind the weak and the small when they fight against the more powerful. A bit like the account of Jesus in Luke's gospel, actually, who came, that was his purpose in that gospel, at least. The story of David and Goliath, the little shepherd boy, the runt of his family, the 8th born son, who defeated the most powerful warrior in the world, asks us, where would we find such courage? And sports can be a wonderful metaphor for this. Sometimes the mighty do fall, and sometimes the righteous do indeed overcome. It's vital we live by such hope, that we carry these stories with us. I'm sure most of us are familiar with the story of David and Goliath. I know as a child I found it compelling. Probably one of my favourite, if not my favourite, biblical story told as a child, certainly up there. It made me believe and think and hold in my heart that this idea that the weak, sensitive child that I was would one day be able to stand up to the bullying giants of life. It gave me an inner strength, if a quiet one. And I still live with that childlike hope. I always do. I walk out with it every day. And I know I'm not alone. I can find that inner courage that Theodore Parker talked about. That's something. It's there if my heart is alive to it. I'm not alone. Now, the story of the slaying of the giant Goliath is found in the Old Testament book of Samuel. Here I will just read you an extract from 2 Samuel, chapter 21, verse 19. I'm just going to edit out a couple of words. It goes like this. Then there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob, and killed Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Do you know who killed Goliath in 2 Samuel? If you do, say it out loud to yourself while you listen to this. Who killed Goliath in 2 Samuel? Give you a second to think. Well, this might surprise you. In 2 Samuel, it was someone named Elahanan, son of Jare Oregem the Bethlehemite. Sorry, tripped over that. Elahanan is how I pronounce it. It's spelled Elhanan. It may not meant to be pronounced that way. That's just me reading the text. I'll read the full verse including the bits I edited out before. So verse 19. Then there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob. And Elahanan, son of Jareh-Origim the Bethlehemite, who killed Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. So not David. Now the story of David slaying Goliath is actually found in the first book of Samuel, which describes Goliath in the following way. This is 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 4 to 7, describing the giant Goliath. And there came out from the camp of the Philistine a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 4 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him. I'll just repeat the key words. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Same description, isn't it? Now, to add confusion here to these two accounts, here is an extract from 1 Chronicles chapter 20, which was probably written, that people claim, a couple of 100 years after the book of Samuel. This section depicts the battles of David and his army at war, including with giants, actually. There are so many battles that depict David as the warrior king leading his army, his troops. But here is another account. And again, there was a war with the Philistines, and Elahanan, son of Jareh, killed Lachmi, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. So all 3 accounts use the same description of the shaft of a spear being like a weaver's beam. Confusing, isn't it? So how do we make sense of these seeming contradictions? Who killed Goliath? David or Elahanan? Who? Well, biblical scholar Dan McClellan describes the slaying of Goliath as one of the greatest, the biggest contradictions that you can find in the Bible. The Bible, in McClellan's understanding, is not what he calls a univocal text, meaning it does not speak with one voice, nor should we view the Bible this way. Instead, it is a text to be engaged with. And I have great sympathy with Dan's view. So who was it who slayed the giant Goliath, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam? McClellan highlights several academic observations from academics throughout time that reveal that the account in 2 Samuel of Elahanan of Bethlehem slaying Goliath predates the account of David in 1 Samuel. That as the legend of David grew, editors of the Davidic tradition appropriated the heroic feat of Elahanan to build up the myth of David as the heroic underdog, and creating in David a different kind of giant mythology. He wasn't a giant physically, but he was a giant of the people, I guess. McClellan highlights that the account in Chronicles is an attempt to show Elahanan as the slayer of Goliath's brother Lachmi. Oh, by the way, there are many accounts of giants being slain and warriors going into battle in Chronicles. David is viewed as this warrior king who came from nothing to lead armies with ingenuity and skill. He is the classic hero, the Campbell's heroic journey. It's the story of David. It's classic. Giants are found in all kinds of mythos, aren't they? And slaying of them. Jack and the Beanstalk, they claim, is thousands of years old, actually, So the central claim of McClellan here is that these accounts were ways to attempt to build up the legend of David as this little man who through courage and ingenuity slayed the giants and led the people. It's a wonderful mythos, and like so many heroic figures of human mythology, contains truth and of course contains great exaggeration. Now, in my view, knowing this does not downplay the idea of courage and guile to allow the small and seemingly weaker amongst us overcoming the giants. At least not sometimes, anyway. In fact, it strengthens. It's a story that strengthens those that feel weaker, doesn't it? Like all heroes, such figures are flawed, and sometimes their supporters build them up in order to enlarge the mythos. Think about all the heroic mythological figure, Robin Hood and people like that. They develop a mythos around them. The legends of King Arthur, the life and history is full of these stories. We find our own truth in such tales, and that's what matters to me, to be honest. Not the truth, but finding our truth within them. It's meant to inspire us, I guess. I wonder who your favourite underdog story is, who your underdog character, your favourite is, whether it's an ancient one or a modern one. Have a think about that. My favourite is probably Daniel San from The Karate Kid, a story that's clearly influenced in part by the story of David and Goliath. Another favourite, I guess, as a little boy, before even Daniel San, was Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Surely the story of Luke destroying the Death Star by finding its one vulnerability is another example of the David and Goliath mythos, because that's what David does with his stone that gets him on the forehead. Another probably would be the story with another example similar to this would be the defeat of Achilles from the Odyssey film that's now out at the movie theatres. A couple of friends have seen it. They raved about it. It's not a history, as long as it's not viewed as history. It's pure mythology. Is the Odyssey another great example? But even like Achilles, the mightiest warrior of them all, had a weak spot, and they found his weak spot. Isn't that just like Luke Skywalker? Isn't that just like the story of David? An ingenuity, finding a way to find the weak spot, like Daniel San in The Karate Kid, who's shown by Mr. Miyagi how to do the crow that defeats the far superior and stronger opponent. So much to these stories. As long as we see what's actually trying to be taught by them, don't get caught up in the facts. Mythos is not about truth or untruth. It's about finding a deeper truth that speaks to us all. That's the point of myth. It's not history. Well, that can be debated, of course. Now, I recently listened to a podcast by Malcolm Gladwell. He was discussing his book, David and Goliath. And he takes a very different view to the conventional understanding of this story, highlighting that David's skill actually puts him at an advantage over Goliath, this big lumbering giant. He highlights that often in war, the mightier don't always prevail, and the righteous actually do far more than you would think. The righteous, seemingly weaker, become victorious, but not through might, through power and might. They do it through guile and skill and heart. That belief in that something extra. He highlights that sometimes our seeming weakness can become our greatest strength. I know myself, I was often told that I was overly sensitive as a child, and that I would not survive in this world if I did not change. if I did not overcome this sensitivity, this feeling too deeply. There was truth in that, of course. That said, I know that today my sensitivity is one of my greatest assets, the greatest gift I have to be of help to others, only if it's used in the right way. And that was the key. It's about using these things that we're given, whatever we have, in the right way, and not just for ourselves, for the good of others. My sensitivity actually turned out to be the stone by which I slayed my inner giant, if you like. Something that overcame barriers in my life. Barriers that can come back. I've been feeling some stuff recently that I need to find courage and strength to gently walk through. And I do. Always do. The central theme that Gladwell is highlighting is that the very thing that puts you at a disadvantage forces you to creatively reinvent the rules of the game to amazing effect. You develop new kinds of skill to compensate for the areas where you are weakest, and you approach the world with a fresh kind of offbeat vision. You play a different game, and suddenly your powerlessness becomes the very root of your power. We hear this all the time, don't we? And so much of the mythos out there about that. It can be disarming at times, but it can also be thrilling. And it can be wildly successful. The underdog does overcome more often than you would think. And I think this is a message that's at the heart of the teachings of Jesus, not the mythos of Jesus, the teachings that lie beneath the story. I don't mean the religion, the mythos built around him, but the radical message that he brought to humanity. He came to reform his religion, to bring his religion back to the people, not to create a new one, but to bring it back to the people. But not through power in a conventional sense. Now, being an ordinary working man, it prevented him from doing so in a conventional sense. He couldn't have done. So he followed his own path. He carved out a different way. He used what he had. He made the most of his simple gifts that life had bestowed upon him. He refused conventional status and power and created new terms of success, showing how the so-called losers become winners and winners become losers. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart." Jesus taught that success was measured by how loving and compassionate you are. Instead of accumulating wealth and power here, store up treasure in heaven, where moth and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. The problem was the worship of other things. You see, such giants actually got in the way. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. He contested all the social values of his day and invited the people into a different dimension of spiritual living, but not through power and strength, through a different way. We can unlock that within each of us. I believe that's the message that he brought. But sadly, this is a message that's so often been lost in the religion created in his name, and in much other religion, actually. Not just that religion, but so much religion becomes something that it was never intended to. Sadly, the worship of other gods and monsters take over. Too often, as in the original story, David becomes the Goliath. Or, to go back to Star Wars, the dark side takes over, the light side of the Force. When you become like those giants you're trying to defeat, You don't become like them. You find a better way, a loving way, a different way, a new way. Now, the Davids and Goliaths come in many forms. They do not necessarily come in human form, actually. The giants, the monsters, the unsurmountable obstacles, they incarnate in life in various ways. And it takes faith and hope and courage to overcome them, even if we've fallen, even if we've failed many, many times. And it's faith, hope and courage that enables us to stand up and try once more. Mark Nepo takes a very interesting slant on this ancient mythos. In the Book of Awakening, he writes about the Goliaths in life being the towering, unsurmountable obstacles that we all face. The impossible dream, the heartbreaking challenges of love and loss such as grief, chronic illness, and the personal traumas we all face. Every day I find myself in conversation with folk living through challenges of all kinds and are finding the faith, hope and the courage to overcome their own personal Goliaths. Mark Nepo describes his own battles with his own Goliaths. After surviving a rare form of lymphoma in the 1990s, he emerged with profound insights on suffering, transformation, faith, hope and resilience. These were kind of the equivalent of the 5 stones, I guess, that David carefully selected when he went to fight the giant Goliath. Nepo was taught the true meaning of courage and of love. He learned that these seeming unsurmountable obstacles were not giants or monsters to be slain, but teachers, hard lessons that compel us to strip away the things that do not really matter in life, discover where the true meaning is found, and uncover the true courage at the heart of our being. Not in vainglory, but as people of faith and hope and of love. We all face our mythological giants in life. I wonder what's been your greatest challenges and how you've walked through them, overcome them. Some of us may be facing some now, right now. What's carried you through? What were your 5 selected stones that helped you defeat your Goliath? What stories, mythos helped carry you through? Not what hero fought your battle, but who or what inspired you to keep on taking the next step, that one of courage, to keep on walking on through, despite the real struggle and suffering. May we all find the faith, the hope and the courage to face what we encounter on our journey through life. May we find the love to encourage one another to keep on, no matter how many times we might fall. Just want to share some final words before I offer some words of blessing. This is just a short, maybe it's a blessing in itself, I'm not quite sure actually what to call it, a little poem maybe, by Sarah Sutherland Dean, and it's called My Heart Fights for Those Who Can't Fight. She wrote, someone called me a bleeding heart liberal. It was not intended as a compliment. However, I will always consider it one of the biggest compliments of my life. My heart bleeds for the underdog. My heart fights for those who can't fight. My heart rejoices in seeing others overcome adversity. My heart desires love and peace for everyone. My heart is compassionate and empathetic. My heart sees pain in others and wants to help. My heart believes in equality. My heart sees the good in people. My heart chooses action over fear. Amen. So I'm going to end this devotion with a few words of blessing. We need to bless more. We can all bless. We bless by giving our whole hearts to life. So let's begin again right here, right now. Let's give our whole hearts to life. So let's return once more to life. Let us live open-heartedly, so that the Spirit that lives to set us free can enter into us, can fill our hearts, so that we may become beacons of love and connection to those that we meet in this world. And may we carry that Spirit with us, and may we do so in all that we feel, in all that we think, in all that we say, and all that we do. Amen.